Hello, welcome back. So now that we've given ourselves a pretty good grounding in the theory of all these pieces and how they fit together, it's time to actually get started on building something. So as I mentioned, I'm going to be building two separate quadcopter builds in this series, and one was the stuff that I got together actually quite a while ago now to make a very basic sort of a beginner's quad, and this other stuff over here is the kind of quad that I would build for myself these days now that I'm a bit more experienced. And I was going to build this one anyway, so I just thought I would build it at the same time as I'm making the basic beginner's one. And every now and then I'll focus on the beginner's one, but every now and then I'll maybe show you something over this side that I'm doing a little bit differently for some reason or other. Now there's probably somebody out there looking at the stuff in those boxes thinking, hold on, how much is that going to cost? And that is a question that I get quite often, especially if I'm out, say if I'm out at the park flying and somebody comes over and looks at what I'm doing, and they'll always ask, how much does one of those cost? So I've listed up all of the things that I'm going to be using in the budget or the basic build, and also the not so budget build there. And I'll put a link to these in the description so you can see where I got them from. And if we just scroll down to cut to the chase, this, if you're starting from absolutely nothing, this is going to cost you, if you do it the way I've done it, about 320 USD. That may seem like quite a bit of money, but if you consider that everything from about this point down you can reuse in a way, like this stuff, if you were to make a second quadcopter, you would be able to use all this stuff again. The same charger, same batteries, same goggles, same FPV gear, same transmitter, although you would need one more receiver, of course, to fly a second quadcopter. And so that leaves the cost of this quad itself, and this is about $100, I think it was. Whoops, that's not right. Oh yeah, 95. So the cost of the quadcopter itself here is 95, and if we switch over to the other one, this was about 200 if I remember correctly. Let me so it's 194 for the quadcopter parts on this one. So you're looking at, say, what was that, 95, so say $100 for that. You're looking at about $220 of like supporting bits and pieces to get started that can be reused. And of course you'll need some other tools down there, maybe even a little bit more than that perhaps, but this is stuff that you can reuse or you may already have anyway. So I'll show you the parts for the beginner's quad first, and then afterward I'll just show you the parts that are different on the other build that I'll be doing. So this is the frame here. It's made of a nice tough nylon material, and some people may turn up their nose at this and say, ooh, plastic. But I have a soft spot for this one because this is the frame that I used for my very first quadcopter build a few years ago, and it worked out great. I really like it. I've had some people say that it can be fragile. That was not my experience. My one was very tough. But I do notice that this one that I bought recently has a slightly different design. So perhaps the material that they're using to make it has changed as well, and it's not quite as tough as it used to be. There is also a model of this where the arms are swept up. So instead of just going directly flat like that, they go up like that. And I've heard people say that that one is more fragile than this too. But in any case, for your first quad, I think this is perfectly okay. And it's made of nylon, which does not conduct electricity. So that's also a nice thing to have. You won't need to worry about, for example, if you build using a carbon fiber frame which conducts electricity, you won't have to worry about charge going from, say, if you screw into the motor windings here, you'll get charge coming and it'll go back into some other part of your flight controller maybe, and that can be a real headache when you're trying to figure out what's going on. But you won't have that problem with a plastic frame. So that's one of the reasons I think this is a pretty good start for a beginner. And it's nice in that we can build it up to fly non-FPV with no, with no cameras pretty easily. And then we can put an extension board on top when we want to put cameras and video transmitters and things on. So this frame comes with that piece and just a little sort of a cage that you can screw on the top to protect from impacts coming from above. It looks like it also comes with some props and a bunch of screws, and you can sort of see there you get 21 of those screws. Yeah, why 21? I'm not sure, but that should give you enough screws to mount the motors with. So anyway, that's a a pretty basic frame. This one was about $10, so it's nice that it's really cheap as well. Now, to make this frame a little bit more easy to use for FPV and mounting stuff on, you can buy these extension plates. Unfortunately, I'm having a very tough time trying to figure out where you can buy these exact ones that I got. I actually bought these about a year and a half ago, and I've searched the internet high and low to find them, and they just don't seem to be around anymore, which is unfortunate because this was only about $7 or $8 for this stuff as well. And it's really great because you can, there's a couple of other pieces in there that you put onto here to extend this a little bit, and then you use these standoffs to put this above like that, and then you can strap the battery on top. And I found this really great. I used my quad with this thing on it for about almost a year probably, and it's not as tough as carbon fiber. Of course, it's not carbon fiber. It's just sort of a fiberglass material. So it's, yeah, it could be tougher, and I actually found that the back bent down after a while, but still I think for a beginner's quad this is perfectly okay. The only similar thing I can find these days is this one on Hobby King, which is about $10, and it's unfortunately out of stock as well, so perhaps they're not making this anymore either. And this is basically the same thing, except it's kind of square at the front, which is, in my opinion, not quite as cool looking as the one I have, which is a little bit tapered, but that's just a matter of preference, I think. For the motors and ESCs, I got this set, and this includes 4 ESCs and 4 motors, of course. I have other ones just over here, and these are, the motors are okay, the ESCs are a bit iffy, so to be honest I'm not sure if I would really buy this again if you want something that you're going to be using for a long time. It's fine for beginners, let me reiterate, it's fine, there's nothing super wrong with it, but I kind of think that if you were buying something that you wanted to really get into this hobby and do some more high performance flying in the future with the same quad, you might be better spending a little bit more money out of the gate and getting something that would give more power in the long run. But it is a very easy way to get everything all in one shot. So you get those, and this little thing is the USB thingy that I was using to connect the ESC to the computer to upload or to change the firmware on the ESCs if you want to do that. You don't really need to. And this one that I got also comes with some 5-inch propellers and some wires and some screws again there. Now if you buy this today, it's around about the same price, but you get actually a few more things. So this is about $63 US, and if you buy it today you get, as well as the 5-inch props, you get some 6-inch props. You get this little spanner thingy, you get a stand for your antennas, some zip ties, some of these motor guard thingies. The rest of it is the same. So you actually get quite a few more things for your money, which is a bummer. I didn't get all that stuff. Anyway, so this is the set. Apparently it does not come with that. So if you look at the comments, you'll see people saying it doesn't come with this, so just watch out for that. You may need to get a power distribution board separately. So some people might be wondering, well, if you're not going to get that motor set, what would you get? Well, actually, everything in that motor set is okay, except for the ESCs are a little bit, they're okay, but they're just not that high performance. So if there was one thing from that set that I would rather not have, it would be these, and I would probably go for instead these ESCs here. These are 20 amps versus 12 amps, and they have a faster processor, and they're a little bit more capable in the kind of signals that they can receive from the flight controller. So they will cost you a little bit more, but if you were to get these ESCs, then this beginner's quad would become a little bit better than a beginner's quad, something that you could do some actually, well, higher performance flying than beginner's stuff. And these motors, I should also mention this, of course, they are a 2204. We actually looked at this earlier, I think, but this is, of course, means 22 millimeters across, 4 millimeters up vertically. So this is, most people have sort of moved on from this size now, and 2205 has become a little bit more of a normal thing. So you might want to look at a 2205 size motor. Will cost you a slight bit more, but 2204 is still perfectly capable for this 250 size mini quad that I'll be building. And the ESCs, I think you probably noticed this already, but they are 12 amp ESCs, and this is probably the bare minimum current rating that you would want to use for this size of quadcopter. I think 20 is probably a little bit more reasonable to have. The flight controller that I'll be using is this one. This is the one that we looked at in one of those earlier videos. It's a Naze 32, and it's about as simple as you can get in the 32-bit flight controller range. And it's quite simple to set up. You don't need too many tricky driver installs on Windows or Linux either. And yeah, it's probably the cheapest you can get, so that's one of the reasons that I chose this one. And a lot of people say, well, why don't you get something that has a little bit more features on it? It's only a few more dollars. And that is true. So you might want to look into that a bit further, but for now this is the one that I'm going to be using. It's perfectly fine for just fun flying and acro flying and racing and stuff like that. To connect everything together, I'm going to use this power distribution board that we looked at earlier. It has a 5 volt and a 12 volt step down regulator on it, but I'm only going to be using the 5 volt one just to supply power to the receiver and the flight controller. To connect the battery to the power distribution board, you're going to need something like this. So this is a XT60. XT I think just stands for this kind of shape of connector, and then the 60 is 60 amps is how much there's enough metal here to allow 60 amps to flow through this area, so that's why it's called that. And I think I'm just going to have to cut this down, it's a little bit long, and solder that up, and that's how I'm going to connect my battery. The radio and receiver that I'll be using are these two. This is the FlySky FS i6 and the FlySky FS IA6B. So this receiver, as we saw earlier, can do normal PWM, which we don't really want, we're not too interested in that, but it can also do PPM and one of those serial connection types called iBus, which will allow us to just use one wire between this and the flight controller. And this again, some people might turn their nose up at this thinking it's a bit of a cheap crappy one, but in my experience it's perfectly fine. I bought this just to do the video series with years ago, about a year and a half ago, and I've just been using this as my daily transmitter all the time. It's perfectly fine. It does pretty good range. It doesn't have some of the advanced features that some of the other radios do, but then again, it doesn't have the big dollar price either. You can get these for about $50 or thereabouts for these two together. So I think it's the perfect thing for a beginner. For the FPV equipment, I'm going to be using this board camera, and these were called board cameras back in the day because they're just a board with a camera on it like that. And this works perfectly fine, although I would not recommend getting this now just because of the rather delicate nature of having this board exposed at the back, and the fact that a lot of the frames that you find these days will make it a little bit difficult to mount this because this has sort of the 4 holes there, and you've got to find some sort of a back plate to stick it on, and then it's kind of awkward to tilt up and down when you want to look at a different angle and stuff. So I would not get this, and especially since for not too much more you can get one of these which solves all of those problems, and it's easier to mount as well. So don't get this one. I'm just using this one because I already have it. As I say, I got all this stuff, or a lot of the stuff I got about a year and a half ago when things were a little bit different. So I'm just going to use this one on the basic beginner's quad just because I have it. And the video transmitter is this one that we looked at earlier. This is a 200 milliwatt 40 channel video transmitter, and again, if you live in some of those countries in Europe that don't permit this much power on a non-frequency hopping transmission, you may have to get something more like a 25 milliwatt one to stay legal in your area of the world. And for antennas, I'll be using probably one of these. These both work quite well. I tend to prefer this one if I'm going to be doing a little bit more risky flying where I might be crashing, because it has this nice plastic cover that will protect the petals of the antenna. So these actually bend and break fairly easily in a crash if you're not lucky, but this should protect them, although they don't protect it perfectly because this plastic case can pop open quite easily, which is why I've got all this sellotape on there. But they're pretty cheap and they do a good job, so that is what I would recommend as a good beginner's antenna. The goggles that I would recommend, it's a little bit hard because there's so many of them out there, but this is one that I have and I've tried, and I can at least give some honest opinion about what it's like. It's pretty cheap too, which is good. This is around about $50, and it has the screen and the receiver and antenna and stuff in there as well. And I forget exactly what there you go, that's the model number. And if you get into this hobby in any serious kind of way, you'll outgrow these pretty quickly. But it is nice to have something around like this if you're out somewhere and you want to show somebody what you're doing and give them a view of what you see while you're flying. It's quite nice to have a backup goggles like this, or if your other goggles break, maybe you could just use these temporarily. But I think for a beginner's goggle, this is probably one of the best things you could get. To make sure you don't fly too long and ruin your battery, probably the simplest way to do it is with one of these cheap battery alarms like this, and you just plug this into the balance port of your LiPo battery, and it will make a loud beeping noise when you really need to land. So it's not the best way to do things, but it's very cheap and very easy, and probably the easiest way to get started, I think. So I'm just going to use one of these. And another kind of buzzer that it's very helpful to have is one of these, and this is the thing that you connect to the flight controller, and it doesn't make such a loud beeping, but it can be controlled by the flight controller, which is very useful to make a beep when you're switching modes, and also to intentionally make it beep when you are looking for it when you crash in the long grass and you can't see it properly. So that's what this buzzer was on there. It's a 5-volt buzzer, so it's a bit of a weaker one than when the buzzer is powered directly from the LiPo. But very cheap. You can get 10 of these for a few dollars, so they're well worth it, and I would not build a quad without having one of these on it these days. And a few other things that are extremely useful to have is some kind of a Velcro strap like this. These type that have a plastic loop at the end where you can put this back in and loop it back on itself to get a really tight fit like that are among the best of the straps. And you'll also find it very useful to have some of these servo cables. These are cheap enough that you can get, I think, about 10 for a few dollars, maybe $3 or $4 for 10 of them. And I'll also need to be cutting one of these just to get a little bit of wire to use to connect my power distribution 5-volt output onto my flight controller. So yeah, you'll need some little bits of wire, and to mount the flight controller onto the frame, I'll probably be using some of these kind of plastic mounting bits like that, probably that one there, and some plastic screws as well. This is not really necessary. You can actually mount the flight controller using double-sided tape or something like that, but I have these here, so I'll probably use those. Another really useful kind of strap or tape to have is this stuff here. It's just Velcro. Ooh, can't see that, but that side is the hooks of the Velcro, and the other side is the fluffy part, and this is quite handy to stick on your batteries or other things that you want to put down and you don't want to have them slipping around like that. So again, not necessary but very useful. Speaking of batteries, I'd probably recommend this one. This is a 3-cell 1300 milliamp hour battery, and this one, you can see I've used this quite a bit. It's been through a few crashes, but this is sort of a mid-range battery. You won't want to be using 3 cells for too long if you really get into doing, you know, super acro, fast, awesome flying and stuff. But it's a pretty good one to start with, and you'll be able to use this to run your goggles and stuff from later on. But eventually you probably want to step up to a 4-cell battery to do cool flying. but I wouldn't want to start with a 4-cell. The 4-cell power can be a little bit hard to control when you're just trying to manage the throttle properly. So what I would probably do is just get a few of these, maybe 2 or 3. Don't spend too much money on 3-cell batteries, because I bought quite a few of these when I started out and I just don't use them anymore. So yeah, don't get too many, I would say. But what you can do is, if you get 2 of these, you can use one of these to fly with and use the other one to power your goggles. For example, those goggles that I showed you just before, they can use one of these batteries to power them with. So you could use one to power your quad and the other one to power your goggles. And the goggles don't actually use much power. So you could just, when you use up the first battery that's on your quad, you could just swap them over, and the battery that you had on your quad should still have enough power in it to power the goggles, and this one should still have enough power to fly the quad. So you could get two flights with just 2 batteries, and yeah, that would run your goggles as well. So that's probably what I would do if I was starting out and I didn't want to spend too much money. To charge your batteries, you will of course need a battery charger, and it needs to be one of these special balance chargers that have the LiPo balance plug connections on there so that it can manage each of the cells inside the battery correctly. This is one that I've been using for a while. It's probably the cheapest one you can get, I think. This one actually requires a voltage adapter, like I'm using a laptop power supply to run this, because it requires, as you can see there, DC 11 to 18 volts. But you can actually get a very similar thing to this it's got a bit larger piece on it, and you can plug it directly into the wall socket to run it without any other power adapter. That's probably the one I'd recommend if you're starting from nothing, but the way they work, the menu systems and the usage is all the same. So I'll go over the usage of this in a future video, and if you get the other battery charger that has the wall adapter thing built into it, it'll just be the same. Everything, all the usage will be the same. So for the other build, the not so budget build, I'll just show you the things that are different from things in the basic build. Starting with the frame, this is a frame that I designed, and I had it cut by a place called Armatan Productions, and they let you upload your design to their website, and they will cut it out for you out of nice carbon fiber. So carbon fiber is tougher than the plastic, of course, but you're going to be paying a bit more for it. This was just under $50, I think, for this frame, and it's going to turn out actually a little bit similar to the frame that we just saw, the nylon one, and the shape and the layout is pretty similar. I really like that layout. It's quite a popular sort of layout, actually. So it's going to be like this. This is one that I actually made myself on my own CNC machine. So I think in the future I might be able to make these myself rather than having to order them from Armatan. But I'll give you a link to this one if you want to try my design and get the exact same thing that I'm building here, keeping in mind that carbon fiber can give you a few more headaches when you're just starting out with electronics than a plastic frame. The motors that I'll be using are these ones here. They are DYS Fire. Oh, and we looked at this as well before, didn't we? It doesn't say what size it is, but it's a 2206. So you can see that it's we compare that with the other one, it's a little bit taller. We're getting deja vu here. I think I did this comparison in one of the earlier videos, but you can see that the vertical side part is slightly larger. So this motor will be able to pump out a fair bit more power, and it should be good for both 5-inch props and 6-inch props. And that means that we'll be able to do a lot more powerful flying, but it will suck a lot more power out of the battery quicker as well. So yeah, I quite like these motors. They have a nice feature on the bottom in that you can easily undo the screw to pull the motor bell off and clean them out or lubricate the bearings and so on, whereas the other motors they have this kind of a pain in the ass thing at the bottom. It's a C-clip there. You have to get that off and make sure it doesn't ping out and fly across the room and disappear, and then it's quite difficult to get back on as well. So that's why I like this kind of system. The ESCs I'll be using are these ones here, and I bought these as a sort of a unassembled, I guess you could say, set. So I got a set of 4. Everything's in here. It's all quite nice and compact, and it was a few dollars cheaper than buying them as a normal foot ready to use ESC, but I don't think it was really worth it. I don't think I'll get these again, because for the few dollars that I've saved, the extra work that it's going to take me to solder all the wires on and then heat shrink them up, so they give you a piece of heat shrink on there as well, yeah, it's just a little bit too much work to be bothered with, really. So I think in the future I would just buy some ESCs that are already ready to go. But as you can see on there, it is a 28 amp ESC. Nice and small, very compact, very light. The power distribution board I'll be using with this one is a little bit different to the other one. It's kind of the same if we look at it in focus. Can we focus? No. Oh, well, oh, there we go. So it's basically the same. It has the same sort of a ground and a 5 volt and a 12 volt step down voltage regulator on it there. The main difference is that it has this convenient plug over here which you can solder your XT60 input to directly, and this just means you don't need that piece of wire, and the battery connection will be right in the middle of the quadcopter, which is where I kind of like to have it. I find that more convenient. For the FPV gear, I'm going to be using one of these Runcam Swift 2 FPV cameras. This is the one that has the VBAT input for the LiPo battery voltage, so it will overlay on the screen while I'm flying the current voltage of the battery, so I can tell when it gets near time to land. The FPV Video Transmitter is going to be this one here. I don't think this is a whole lot better or worse than the other one, but I don't have another one of those other ones, so I'm just going to use this one instead. And the antenna, I'm probably going to use this one. This is a little bit more expensive antenna than those other ones. I think this is about 20 to around about $20, I think. But what I like about this is it's very, very sturdy and robust. You can have crash after crash after crash, and it just doesn't break. So it pays for itself in the long run. So this is what I've been using on my main quad all the time, and I'm going to keep using it on this one. I just take this off. I only have one of them, but because they last so long, you can just take it off one quad and put it onto whichever quad you're currently flying, and it will just do the job. Now on this build, I'm not going to be using one of these LiPo battery alarm things that plug into the balance plug of the battery, because as we saw just before, I can see the voltage of the battery on screen while I'm flying an FPV. So I don't really need this, but the drawback with the on-screen display is that you have to remember to check it all the time as you're flying constantly. I've gotten into the habit of that now, but when I was flying FPV earlier and I had that kind of display, and I was really just focusing on trying not to crash and things like that, I found that I would sometimes just forget that it was there and run my battery into the ground anyway. So for that reason, I do like to have an audible alarm still, and it's also useful if you happen to not be flying an FPV. Then you won't be looking at that screen anyway. So if you're just flying line of sight, you still probably want to have an audible alarm. But I'm not going to use one of these. What I'm going to do is make use of that iBus sensor plug on the receiver and plug in one of these voltage sensors. So it's going to go into this sense plug. That's the, it's a bit hard to see, it's dark, but it'll be the 3 pins on the left at the top there, and that'll plug, this plug will go in there. And this little thing is made by FlySky, and it's a voltage sensor, so the other 2 wires that come out of it are just going to go directly to battery voltage. And I'll probably cut this wire down, it's way too long, but it comes with these pins on it, which are also not very useful. And what this will do for me, it will display on here the battery voltage, and it will also let me set a voltage level at which an audible alarm will start to sound on here to warn me when the voltage goes to a certain level. So it's flexible in that I can set the voltage that it starts at, as opposed to this one, which is just going to start at some preset voltage. One other thing that I'm going to put on one of these builds at least is these plastic guards that go under the motor, and they just help to sort of protect the motor a little bit in a crash. The idea is that they would go on here like this, and then when a crash or an impact comes in from here, the motor itself is not going to be directly affected. Now I've found that they are not really that sturdy. They will protect the motor a little bit, but what I find them more useful for here in the area in New Zealand where I live, at least, is to stop mud from getting into the motor. So if you live in an area that's dry and dusty and you don't have to deal with mud very much, then you're probably not going to be too interested in these, although they do protect your motor from crashes a little bit. I'll just come back to what I said about this setup a little bit. I probably sounded a little bit harsh on these ESCs, but I used these for almost a year and they were perfectly okay. My reservations mainly center around the fact that they didn't handle 4S batteries too well, but they were perfectly fine on 3S, and I was happy with them for a long time, even when I wasn't really a newbie anymore. And this video that we're looking at here, I actually filmed using this exact setup almost. Maybe I think the motors were slightly different, but everything else is almost exactly the same as I am about to build for this basic newbie's quadcopter. So don't think that it's a baby's build or something crappy like that. It's perfectly okay. It's just not, you know, a pro build, that's all. Anyway, that's all I have for this video, so thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.